Hi, and this is the Physics High Podcast. A quick quiz. Do you A, want to be inspired by science communicators? B, want to learn all about science education? C, want guidance on your scientific journey? Well, how about D, all of the above? Today my guest is Petr Lebedev. Now, Peter is a science communicator based here in Sydney, Australia. Now, his particular interest is physics educational research, but that is just one of the many hats that he wears. In essence, he is a full-time science communicator, and he's been called on many times by TV shows and radios to be the resident science expert when various topics arise where they needed a science expert. Now, he's also written for Discovery Channel, and he's also currently the researcher and a writer for one of YouTube's largest science channels, Veritasium, with Derek Muller. And not only that, he's also been a regular fixture on numerous podcasts with Dr. Carl or Carl Kruszenicki. Welcome, Peter.
Hello, Paul. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, tell us a little bit more about what it means to be a science communicator. Now, I've had a number of interviews now with a variety of people who are scientists, educational researchers, and so forth. And science communication is an important part of their role. I guess you're the first person I'm talking who specifically his role would say is a science communicator. So tell us a little bit more what you do.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like the main kind of premise and like the main goal of science communication is to communicate science to the general public. Like I understand that there's many, there are science communicators who are only focused on, affecting policy. So talking to government or talking to industry or whatever. But yeah, like the kind of science communication that I do and the kind of science communication I'm personally most interested in, for better or for worse, is talking to the public. So now I work with Derek, and I help him make videos, right? So I do a bunch of the research and the writing and, planning the videos that are coming up with interesting topic ideas, working on like titles and thumbnails to make sure the videos actually get seen, working with cool writers to make sure, like there's currently just the two of us like full time on the team, but we've been working with a lot of like freelance science writers. So that's kind of my job, like to make cool videos with Derek.
But it's also a outreach as well. So, for example, going onto TV and so forth, but also speaking to high school students, visiting schools as well.
Yeah, I mean, pre-COVID, I did a bunch of that, and yeah, that's always been a really big. I really miss it. I really miss it of like going and doing live talks, because I think like video is great and podcasts are great, but like there's something about like the energy of a live talk that is kind of irreplaceable, right? Like because you can really feel like you'd get this in a classroom, right? Like the difference between teaching online and teaching face to face is so different, right? And it's the same thing in the live talk. You can say something and you bring a certain energy to the room, and like the audience gives a different kind of energy back, and there's like an interplay, and it's really fun.
I would imagine that being a science communicator actually has some of its challenges. So if I were to talk to, let's say, a cosmologist like Geraint, he would communicate something very specific, something that is his strength, his field. Whereas if I would talk to, let's say, Jeff Wiener from CERN, his area is particularly interested is particle physics. And that would be true for many scientists. Their expertise is their communication. You, as a science communicator, have to be across a lot of topics. So, for example, if they're wanting to ask questions about COVID, you'd have to be across it. How have you found that? Because there are so many topics you could be asked about.
I don't talk about medical stuff. I'm not qualified, and I think it's actually definitely dangerous for me to do that. I know as much as the average person, maybe even less. I am a little bit across physics, right? Like that's my background. It's my degree, my initial degree, my bachelor's and my honors was in geophysics. And then I did my PhD at the University of Sydney, submitted my thesis a couple of months ago in physics education research. So like I know my physics more or less okay, right? Don't ask me to solve a partial differential equation anytime soon. But so I definitely choose kind of the topics that I'm able to talk about carefully. Like I need to make sure that I'm not BSing my way through things. There's two parts to this. One is being comfortable with saying, hey, I actually don't know, right? There's so many things even about my subject of expertise, right? I know little to nothing about. So I'm very comfortable with going, hey, I don't know, but I can look it up, or even better, you can look it up. Like, I hear this book is good. And another thing that I do is when there is time. So in something like making a video, Derek and I make sure we consult with the experts, right? Actually, as early on in the process as possible, right? Because the experts will not only help you get the science right, they will be able to help you find the stories that are more interesting than the story that you initially had, right? There's been many cases where we're like, oh, here's a cool thing. And then you dig into the literature a little bit and you find like the experts in that thing, in like you find a cool paper and you email, the writers of that paper, and they'll be like, hey, this is cool, but this is even cooler. Like, let me tell you about this thing. So yeah, like if you can, actually, even if you can't, please reach out to experts. If you're a science communicator and you're making a video about a topic that is not exactly in your wheelhouse, right? Probably ask an expert. And you mentioned Grant. Grant has been one of those experts, and he's been bloody amazing. And I can't be more thankful for the scientists that give up their time to, help chumps like us.
You did a degree at Flinders, is that correct? In geophysics, which
no,
Flinders?
Curtin.
Curtin, that's right. It was Curtin. But then you decided to go into specifically science education research. And I heard a little story, actually. It was, I guess, a starry-eyed liking of Dr. Karl and Derek Muller at the University of Sydney that sort of attracted you to the University of Sydney.
It was Derek. It wasn't Karl, which is embarrassing because I talked to him about this. I only realized that Karl was at UCID like the first day of my PhD. Where I was walking to my new office, right? And 2 doors down from me, there's like, the sign that says Dr. Karl, and there's like this like 6'2", 6'3" giant in a colorful shirt. And I was like, oh my God, that's Dr. Karl. So let me back up. I finished my honors degree and I realized that I wasn't temperamentally suited to be a scientist. As in, I love science and I find it deeply fascinating, but this kind of goes back to the previous question. I find a lot of things really, really interesting, and I love learning about all of those things, but I don't have the temperament or the patience or to kind of drill in on one tiny part of physics for a really long time, right? Which is maybe that's not exactly how it works, but at least in my, the 21-year-old minds, like what was like, this is how academia is structured. So I wasn't particularly interested in doing that. What I was interested in doing was talking about science, because I love science and I loved talking about things. I love music and filmmaking and drama and all those kind of things. And I was a big fan of, the usual suspects of science communication, right? Like from, David Attenborough and Carl Sagan and Jacques Cousteau, who were like really big early influences, to the kind of the more modern crop of Henry from Miniphysics and Diana from Physics Girl and Derek from Veritasium and Destin from Smarter Every Day and like a dozen others, right? But yeah, like Derek has been near the top of my list of like, this is a really high quality science communicator, like this is a really high quality like science filmmaker, and I kind of just wanted to do that. I kind of had the two options, right? Of like, do I just like finish this degree and strike out on my own and figure it out as I go along? Or go down, like admit that I'm currently not ready to do that. I'm not, skilled enough either in science or in communication to try to go alone. Which I guess is a false dichotomy, because I'm sure I would have found help, right? Like I'm sure I would have found clever, interesting people. But basically I was like, you know what? There's this at UCID, Derek did his PhD there, and the topic of his PhD is about how to make physics education videos, effective. And I thought that was really interesting. And, that degree and the skills that he learned from that degree, like, has seemingly led him to some really cool places. And I was like, you know what? Like, let's just give it a shot. It was cool. Then, plus, I want to like move to Sydney. Like, it's a cool place. It's an expensive place, but it's a cool place.
Now, my little starry-eyed quip was just a lame attempt as a joke, I guess. But you were right. We admire people who communicate science so well. And for both of us, we want to do that ourselves. It's the joy of communicating our concepts and seeing kids, older students, adults even, all going, oh wow, that's amazing,
Yeah, and I think there's like something just beautiful about really killer storytelling, right? Like, I think that's a thing that I didn't rate highly enough, but I really do now. It's like when a person can tell a really good story about anything, it's like, yes, this is great. And like, science is beautiful, right? It's nature is beautiful. The world is a beautiful place, right? And why would you not want to tell interesting stories about that? I think like specifically with kind of making videos or filmmaking or whatever, right? There's a special joy in, because I kind of think of it as like three separate parts. And like, I know that they're not mutually exclusive, but like, it really feels like there's three important parts to this, right? Like, there's really, with video, there's visuals, right? So you need to film beautiful things. Your shots need to be beautifully composed. And that can be like filming or animation or whatever, right? And then there is beautifully crafted writing. And it like the prose that is just like poetic and fits the mood and paints a beautiful picture, right? With the words, right? And then there's kind of like the music and the narration and all of the kind of things, right? So I've gotten shivers down my spine from listening to beautiful music or reading poetry or seeing amazing photography, right? And I think the great thing about like making videos or like film or whatever is you have these three things, and if you combine them just right, and this is perfect, and this is perfect, and this is perfect, like, it's just like goosebumps. And I don't think I've made anything that has like perfectly hit all those three marks. I'm very much still a novice, but it's cool to try, right? It's just exciting. Sorry, that was a rant about filmmaking and how cool
No,
it is.
definitely not, because that's in order to communicate science, it's not just about the content. We're not just teaching people about facts. We're actually trying to convey an emotive response. And in order to do that, we need to look at all the senses. So the visuals and the auditory and the whole thing, the kit and boodle, is part of the process. David Attenborough is good because he gets those three parts right. It's not the star of the show. The science is the star of the show. But all of those things carry so that it becomes not just an intellectual affair, it becomes a much more holistic affair of communicating
it's like
science.
an emotional thing.
Absolutely. So now, you started geophysics at university, but obviously your science endeavours started much earlier. So tell me a little bit, what got you into science?
So I was really lucky that both of my parents are physicists. It's kind of ridiculously lucky to have one parent that's a physicist, let alone two. I think like the chances increase if one parent's a physicist. They kind of introduced me to that from a young age. I've always loved physics despite never like loving mathematics, right? Like, there are certain people that adore math because it's, pristine and pure, and there's all these beautiful interconnections between things. And I kind of get that, but it never clicked for me, right? For me, what was interesting is like, we live in a beautiful universe that is just really cool. And there's so many unexplained things about us. And like that's what, that's one of the things that science does, is like try to explain the mysteries all around us. I think my parents did a really good job at maintaining and encouraging my curiosity, right? I never felt particularly like pressured to go into science. Like, I occasionally make a joke that if I didn't become a physicist, they would disown me. And I don't think that's like quite true. They've been supportive of many other things that I've done as well. But yeah, it turns out that if you're interested in how the world works, which I think a lot of kids are, you might end up stumbling upon. Anyway.
Now, getting into back our topic of science communication, how do you see a role of science communication? I know you love it, and we know this drives you, but I guess the question is more centered as to why do you think science communication is important?
This is genuinely a really hard question. I think one of the goals of science communication is to drive ourselves out of a job, right? Like, hopefully, there's going to be a period in time where science communicators are not needed because people understand the importance of science and its role in society, right? And not just in like society as in like blah, blah, blah. It helps the economy and it, lets us build medical devices and rocket ships. Like, sure, that's important, but that's kind of like the boring. For me, that's the boring part. The important part is that it's like art or it's like music or it's like, whatever, right? Like, you don't have music communicators, right? You don't have people whose job is to be like, you know what, this music thing, really cool. Actually, I might totally be wrong. There might be music communicators. I guess like Adam Neely is a music communicator. He talks about music theory and he's an amazing jazz bass player. Like, so I guess there are like music communicators, but they're, like no one is doubting. Actually, again, this is not true. People are doubting the importance of music because they're not funding it properly, right? The government doesn't really care about the arts. So maybe there should be arts and music communicators. I'm totally backtracking here. My argument is falling apart in front of my eyes. But basically what I'm trying to say is like, I don't think people realize how wonderful and cool science is, right? And I think a lot of people could fall in love with it if they did, right? And not because we want them to be professional scientists, but because we want them to appreciate, one, the beauty of the world at whatever level they want to, and two, to appreciate the cultural importance of science, right, and the contribution of scientists. So I think that's kind of the pitch. I think the difference between science and music is that most people do appreciate music. Is just like the government doesn't particularly tend to fund it that much, right? With science, it's maybe actually the other way around. I think most people are like, "Ugh, this science thing, didn't really like it in high school," but there are not enough, but there's still like decent funding, right? Because everyone thinks it's useful for the military. So, but that's another rant.
So there's another aspect of science communication that's come up with a number of my interviews. How do you see the role of a good science communicator in terms of how science works?
This feels like an in for my rant about the scientific method and how it doesn't actually exist, which is great. So thank you. Yeah, I think this is where actually a lot of science communicators fail, right? And I don't think it's the science communicator's fault. I think like there's many moving cogs in a machine, and one of those cogs is producers who want to tell a simple story, right? And there's sometimes like this story of like science is, observation and hypothesis and then testing and then bam, we're done. And it's a self-correcting method. And it's like, yeah, that's not quite right. Like if you read any philosopher of science or historian of science, right? There's these wonderful classes that you can take or these wonderful books that you can read written by historians and philosophers of science. One really good one that I'd like to recommend is Theory and Reality by Peter Godfrey Smith, right? It's basically the first year history and philosophy of science textbook, but it doesn't read like a textbook. It's just a really good popular book. And like you realize that there is no unifying scientific method, right? That how psychologists do things is very different to how cosmologists do things. And how cosmologists do things is very different to how, particle physicists do things, right? You can't have a controlled experiment in cosmology that'll make you need to make another universe, right? And people do that with computer modeling, right? But that's not the exact same thing. What I'm saying is there's no unified scientific method. There are many scientific methods, right? Like plural, which is like that's one of my pet peeves. Yeah, I think this is something that science communicators haven't done a great job, in my opinion, of communicating. But frankly, neither have I, right? Like, I haven't made a video about, the lack of a scientific method. Sometimes stories are too nuanced and too convoluted to, be. I think they're interesting. I think this is interesting, but I'm not sure if that many people do. Right? When you're arguing about like the nuances of the scientific method, I sometimes also wonder whether it's important. Like the science, sadly, especially some types of science, like, climate change, science related to climate change is very politically charged. So sometimes maybe it's not a crazy idea to just be like, we are a united front, science, it works, just go with us, right? Like, trust the science, even though like I don't really know what trust the science means, because like in my head, trust the science means trust the consensus of scientists. Like there's a really great book by Naomi Oreskes called Why Trust Science. Please read it. It's great. It's just great.
Changing tack, you've been through the process, you've completed your PhD. What advice would you give to a student who says, I'm thinking of a career in science?
I would frustratingly answer that question with a question and ask what part and what are you interested in and what do you actually want to be doing, right? Because the careers in science are really varied and they're very diverse, and a lot of them don't look like each other, which is one of the appeals of it. It is a very broad thing, right? I feel unbelievably lucky to be able to basically learn about whatever I find interesting at the time, go into the literature for like, I don't know, 2 weeks, maybe a bit more, right? Ask the leading experts on this stuff, like questions, and then, make a video about that. And that's very different to what, I was doing a year ago, where it was like just looking into one part of physics education research and, doing that kind of science there. I guess for a high school student, it's like, yeah, just do science in high school. Even if you didn't, you can still get into like do a bridging course and get into university to do science. I have zero regrets about doing a physics degree, right? I could have, finish the degree and become a professional musician, assuming professional music would have me. I don't think they would have.
You mean the second Brian May?
Brian May, right? Like, or do the opposite of Brian May, right? Get the PhD and then start Queen. That would be great. That's never gonna happen. Yeah, Brian May is amazing. Like, he's been a childhood hero, right? Both for the guitar playing and the astrophysics. Like, him and his dad built like the guitar, right? The Red Special, they built it together, and like the neck is out of like the fireplace. It's amazing. It's really cool. He wound his own pickups. It's Brian May. Just what was I saying? What I was saying is I have no regrets about doing a physics degree, even if I never used it in the rest of my career. I would have no regrets about doing it.
Now, my last question is going to be much more lighthearted. So I'm giving you the opportunity to teach us something, as I've done with all my interviewees, something that you are, I guess, nerding out with. So, for example, you're in mixed company. This is the first topic that comes to your mind if you had an opportunity to share something. What would that be?
I nerd about like basically anything anything I'm remotely interested in, I like kind of take it to a ridiculous extent, right? Like I'm the type of person that has like I've been playing guitar for close to like 15 years, I guess, right? Since I was 11. Yeah, like every single guitar I've had, I would like change the electronics, I would change the pickups. I would like, because I know that like this pickup with this like the basswood with the maple top would sound like a little bit too bright for the kind of sound that I was looking for. I'm not sure how much of it is legit, right? But yeah, I nerd out about everything. I currently play this guitar called a Strandberg, and I'm named after a guy called Ola Strandberg. I guess I can bring it out, but the basic idea is that it's headless, right? So you don't actually have like your normal tuning heads here. They're actually at the bridge, and it's this weird and wacky shape, and the neck isn't rounded. Like on a guitar or on a violin or whatever, you'd always have like a rounded neck. It's like an offset trapezoid. So like imagine a pyramid and then like slice the top of the pyramid. So your thumb is always against a flat surface. So like you get a lot less like muscle strain and things like that. I can totally.
I think you should get it. I think you should get it.
Yes, good. All right, I am back. Ta-da. Look, it doesn't have a neck, right? So it's just like the strings. Yeah, you chop the strings off here, and then the back of the neck, it's like this feels like just a show and tell at school, but it's a trapezoid, right? So you can see that it's not like this is a flat edge, this is a flat edge, this is a flat edge. So when you play, like your thumb is always against a flat surface.
It needs a pickup, I assume. If you play it, we won't hear it that very well.
Yeah, you won't, but I guess I can. A little bit of Queen, since we were talking about Brian May. What I find really like fascinating about that song is like I don't think that song could have been written on any other instrument that's not a guitar, right? Like there's a bunch of things that I think about with like the tools that we use to construct the things that we whatever, right? So I find tools fascinating, but the basic idea is that you're going from right. So this is super natural on a guitar. Right, and I guess like, you know, like you wouldn't come up with these riffs on a piano, right? Because that's not natural for your hands. But on a guitar, it's like the most natural thing in the world, which I think is kind of wacky. But yeah, I nerd out about a bunch of things. I nerd out about this kind of stuff too. This is like Leica M2.
Oh, nice.
From 1961.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's a box, right? Like film cameras are just a box with a shutter, and like that's it. Like you open and close the box.
But it's an expensive box.
It's also a beautiful box, and I carry this box around with me every day, and I'm so thankful that, you know, I bought it. It's also like super worn, and like that's kind of neat. It's kind of cool to imagine like the places it's been and the stories that it, you know. Yeah, so I nerd out about basically everything.
It's been an excellent podcast, Peter. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you. We've got a sense of your passion in science, communication, in physics, in Brian May and guitars, and even your interest in photography. We're bringing out a very nice Leica as a little at the end. You're certainly you've got a lot of obviously passions in your life. So
distracted a lot. Yeah.
So, in any case, thank you so much for your time. It's like I said, it's been a real pleasure, and I do hope we have an opportunity to talk again as we go further down your science communication career.
Of course, that would be lovely. Thank you so much for having me on, Paul. It's been a pleasure. It's always a jolly good time talking to you. So.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to get notifications of up-and-coming interviews as well as my other physics content. My name is Paul from Physics High. Until next time.